Boxy, Boxy. We're live. Hi, I'm Larry Harnish, and this is Boxy. Boxy is the Los Angeles County District Attorney's files in the Black Dahlia case, and we're going to be talking about you today, Boxy. Really? Yes, we are. Okay. Good morning. I am Larry Harnish, and I have been doing an Ask Me Anything on the Black Dahlia case for a while. I started doing them because I got fed up with the poor quality of, for lack of a better term, the true crime industrial complex, the TV shows, the podcasts, the articles, just the whole thing. I got fed up with it. As I've said before, but it's worth saying again, for more than 20 years, I would talk to anybody with a microphone and a camera. I absolutely would. I felt it was my obligation, my duty, to set the record straight in the Black Dahlia case. And it became increasingly clear to me a couple of years ago that the people doing true crime, the podcasts, the TV shows and that sort of thing, they don't want the record set straight. They want a regurgitation of whatever is floating around out there, and floating in a literal term. And so I got tired of doing them. I don't do podcasts anymore. I don't give interviews. This is it. Last time I had a podcast show up and ask questions, fine. If they come back, we'll see what I do. But anyway, so who is this Larry Harnish guy anyway? Larry Harnish, I am a retired journalist, 34 years in daily journalism, 27 at the Los Angeles Times. I retired in 2015. This will become important later. And I started researching the Black Dahlia case in 1996 for a story about the 50th anniversary of the Black Dahlia case in 1997. Aired in January of 1997, or it ran in January of 1997. So that's kind of who I am. I have been around the Black Dahlia case for a long time. I was very lucky in that I did my research back in 1996. I talked to people, a few were still alive. They're gone now. They can't be interviewed. So I was very fortunate in that respect. If somebody set out today to write about the Black Dahlia case, they would run into just an undergrowth of all the things that have been written about Elizabeth Short since then, most of which aren't terribly accurate. Anyway, that's a very brief introduction of who I am and what I am doing. Couple of ground rules. I do the Ask Me Anything on the first Tuesday of the month. And it's just Black Dahlia questions. Okay. Questions. Not, this is more of an observation than don't do that. I got so many George Hodel, Steve Hodel questions that I split that off into another session. That's the third Tuesday of the month. In this case, it will be September 16th. Okay. So no George Hodel, Steve Hodel questions. No. Just Black Dahlia stuff. Okay. And questions. Now, I usually get a troll. The true crime community is full of trolls. I usually get one. I use a moderation program to kind of control the chat. You'll notice it's on really slow. Every 2.5 minutes, you can post something in chat. That's because the trolls were just eating me alive. So unfortunately, that's how it goes. Anyway, so that's a little bit about how it works. I will talk for a bit, probably this time, because I have a lot to say, a lot of ground to cover. I'll probably talk for a little bit longer than usual. And then I alternate between live questions from the chat and questions that have been submitted. I have a lot of questions that have been submitted. I doubt that I will get to them all. I will do my best, but I don't know. Anyway, that's how it works. But I'm going to talk for a while first. And yeah, the next Dahlia session will be October 7th. October, is that possible? Yes, it is. Okay. First of all, a report on the book. I am at 178,000 words. That's a lot. People say, oh, well, Larry Harnish has given up. Larry Harnish has writer's block. And I will tell you right now, You don't get to 178,000 words playing computer solitaire. No, it's work. And at this point, I am rethinking the 10-day period between when Elizabeth Short's body was found and the funeral. Okay. Because that's just pandemonium. There are names and people popping all over the place. It's almost impossible to keep that straight. And so organization, as we will see further down the line in today's discussion, organization is a key issue. It's a key challenge for anybody who wants to write about the Black Dahlia case. You want to write about the Black Dahlia case, you have to figure out who you're going to include, who you're going to leave out, and you have to be willing to question everybody. Okay. So that's kind of where I am at this point. How long is it going to be? I don't know. When will it be published? When I'm done. You know, I'm hard to please. It has to be right. And I spent a long time kind of hashing out the analysis, because I had just finished the section on the crime scene and the autopsy. So I have all this information fresh in my head, and I want to analyze the crime scene and the autopsy. But when I did that, it just brought the narrative to a complete stop. This is a narrative, okay? You got to have a through arc. And so the analysis it wasn't working. And so I spent a long time on it, and it's like, no, it's not working. I need to go back and look at this 10-day period between the discovery of the body, the identification of Elizabeth Short, the autopsy, and then the funeral. And pretty much after that, it dies way down. It, quote, died, no pun intended. The stories taper off quite a bit. So, but it is just pandemonium at that point. So that's what I've been doing. Now, I'm going to talk about true crime, and I'm going to talk about true crime and the Black Dahlia case. I may antagonize some people. Sorry, I've already antagonized William J. Mann. I got an email from Mr. William J. Mann over the last Ask Me Anything. He's unhappy with me. He was very cross. He wanted me to take down last month's video. Obviously, I haven't done that. He was going to write a letter to Simon & Schuster about me. Okay. And he was upset for two reasons that I'll get into in a bit. But I want to talk about true crime in general and where the Black Dahlia case fits into it. Someone emailed me a copy of this. Not as sharp as this, not as good as this. This is sharp. This is real. This is right off the district attorney's. This is straight from you, Boxy. Yes, no, it is. Hey, have you seen this list of suspects floating around the internet? It appears to be, a police list of suspects. Indeed, it is sort of. It is, and usually the list. Usually, you see the list like this. You don't see the entire page. If you see the entire page, it says Lieutenant Frank B. Jimison, February 20th, 1951. And he lists various names. He doesn't list Leslie Dillon anywhere, but there are a list of suspects. This list, like this, was the genesis of the Wikipedia article on Black Dahlia suspects. The list on Wikipedia has since been amended, and it's just a kitchen sink of people throwing names in there now. But it was originally based on this. And so somebody sent me a very blurry copy of this and said, hey, have you seen this? Yes, I have. Here's what I say about your list. Hide your eyes, Boxy. Here's what you do with this list. You tear it up and you throw it away. Why did I just do that? Why? This was the list of suspects, right? Okay. Think about it for a minute. How do people get on the list of suspects? And that isn't my only copy. I have others. That's just a prompt. How do people get on the list of suspects? They're known to the police. Well, if they're known to the police, they must have been investigated, right? Yes. They must have been interviewed, right? Yeah. So the police knew about all these people. So they're not suspects. They're all eliminated. So nonetheless, various people in the true crime industrial complex go through that list that I just tore up and say, well, how about Patrick S. O'Reilly? How about Mark Hansen? Who's on? How about Carl Balsiger? No, all of those people were eliminated. Okay. Harry Hansen, lead detective in the case, was positive that they never ever interviewed the actual killer. He said, "I know we never interviewed the guy." So in the Black Dahlia case, it isn't a matter of the police knew who did it and they just couldn't get enough evidence. They never talked to the guy. They were certain of that. And so my message to the true crime community is stop treating the Black Dahlia case like a game of Clue, like that list that I just tore up. Well, it's got to be on there somewhere. No, those are all people who didn't do it. If you look at it realistically and rationally, that is a list of people who didn't do it. Nobody on that list killed Elizabeth Short. Now, there are a few people they could never find. One of them is Sergeant Chuck. Ooh. Sergeant Chuck was supposedly a violent serviceman at Camp Cook, and he and Elizabeth Short supposedly shacked up. And supposedly, she reported him to his commanding officer and got him sent overseas, and he was mad at her. You would not believe the amount of time that the police spent looking for Sergeant Chuck. They never found him. That hasn't stopped the true crime industrial complex of deciding that Sergeant Chuck was really Lieutenant Balsiger. Sergeant, lieutenant, that's almost the same thing, right? We'll talk to a sergeant and a lieutenant. They will tell you, no, a lieutenant and a sergeant are not the same. But that is what you get in, for example, Eli Frankel's Sisters in Death. Oh, it was really Carl Balsiger. No. So no, they spent a lot of time looking for Sergeant Chuck. There's no guarantee that Sergeant Chuck was actually a real person. Another one was a Chicago police officer. You would not believe how much is in Boxy about how much time they spent looking for a Chicago police officer. Why were they looking? Why were they looking at a Chicago police officer? Well, one of the security guards, one of the ushers, I think it was the lead usher at, I believe it was CBS in Columbia Square, said that, oh yeah, Elizabeth Short and Chicago police officers showed up, and it was too late to get into a particular show, but the guy showed his Chicago police badge and I let them in. Okay, that's where that comes from. They spent a ridiculous amount of time trying to track down the Chicago police officer. They got in Boxy. I'm not sure if it's I'm not sure if the DA releases it now, but it's in here because I have it. A list of all the retired Chicago police officers living in Southern California. I have a list of them as of the late 40s. They looked at every one of those guys. Yes, they did. You cannot imagine how much time they spent investigating Sergeant Chuck. They sent 2 detectives up in the Santa Barbara Camp Cook area looking for information about Sergeant Chuck. They spent a ton of time looking for a Chicago police officer. They looked at everybody. The only one that they never really got very far on was, pardon the expression, queer woman surgeon. You know, she's on the list too. They never got very far with that. But the point is, people treat it like a game of Clue. People look at the list of suspects. It's got to be somebody on here. Was it George Hodel at the Soudan House? You know, was it Carl Balsiger? Was it Mark Hansen? No, it wasn't any of those people, which brings us to Mr. William J. Mann's book, the forthcoming book in January, Murders, Monsters, and Murders, Monsters, and something else in Murders and Monsters in Mid-Century Hollywood, something like that. I would have to look it up. Anyway, I talked about Mr. Mann's forthcoming book in the last session. And I got an email from him, and he had asked to do an interview. Black Box Radio, I think you missed this. I don't do true crime interviews. You are a true crime podcaster, so you are welcome to be there, but I am not going to answer your questions because you're a true crime podcaster. You can listen, but I'm going to ignore your questions. So no hard feelings, just no. Anyway, where was I? Oh yes, with William Mann. He was very unhappy about last month's Ask Me Anything for two reasons. And as I said, he wanted to interview me for the book. I said no, because I don't do interviews anymore. So I got an email from him, and he was upset. He wanted me to take down the last month's Ask Me Anything video. I have not taken it down. I will not take it down. I don't see any reason to take it down. One reason he wanted me to remove it is because I spoiled who his guy is. Okay. And let me point out, I deliberately did not name the guy. Is he on the list? Yeah, he's on the list. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I deliberately did not name this guy. I described him, but you would have to know a ton of inside information on the Black Dahlia case to have any idea of who I'm talking about. Otherwise, you won't know. The average person who comes to this won't have a clue who I'm talking about. That was his first complaint. His second complaint was that I had received an advance review copy under false pretenses. Okay. And this is going to be a long digression on advanced review copies. If you don't care about that, feel free to tune out. Okay. How did I get an advance copy of this book, which comes out in January? Was it Murders, Monsters, and Madness in Mid-Century Hollywood? I think that's what it is. Anyway, how did I get an advance copy of this book? Well, there's a website called NetGalley. And anyone here, you can go create a profile on NetGalley, establish your credentials as a book reader or a book reviewer or whatever, and you can request to see forthcoming books. And I've done a couple. I haven't done a lot because there isn't a lot on NetGalley I particularly care to read. I did a couple. I did a review of one of Scott Eyman's. Scott Eyman's a Hollywood biographer. I reviewed his biography of Cary Grant a few years ago. He didn't complain about what I said about it. But what you do is you create a profile, like anything you set up, like Goodreads or whatever. You set up a profile. Okay. And what did I say on the profile? Retired from the Los Angeles Times. I publish a blog called the LA Daily Mirror. And that's true. Now, what he was talking about was there was one field, because I signed up for NetGalley a long time ago. There was one place where I had neglected to remove LA Times. Okay. As soon as he pointed that out, I remedied that because I don't write for the LA Times anymore. And nobody should have the idea that I do. As I very clearly state on my biography, I am retired. I don't do that anymore. And I did review Eli Frankel's book, Sisters in Death, before it came out. I gave it a frank review. He did not complain. I gave a glowing review to Hallie Rubenhold's latest book. I think A Story of a Murder. It's an excellent book. And she was very happy with my review, by the way. But Mr. William J. Mann is very unhappy with me for giving away the guy who I didn't name, because I don't want to give traction to his ridiculous idea. And then that I got the copy of this book under false pretenses. And let me point out, having worked in the journalism business, again, a long rant, advanced review copies are not state secrets by any stretch of the imagination. All you need to, and in the old days when we got print copies, the janitors at the LA Times would take away dumpsters full of advanced review copies that had not been read. I mean, it's junk mail, practically. And a writer should never see the way newspapers haul away advanced review copies. You should, because it'll break your heart. Anyway, Now they're all electronic. But you know, I checked this morning on NetGalley. 43 people have already posted reviews of this book, mostly 4 stars, a few 3 stars. They read kind of the same. And I would never suggest that NetGalley has fake reviews. That would never happen, of course, not like Amazon. But anyway, so no, I didn't, you know, I mean, it was an oversight. I don't write for the LA Times. And my biography makes it clear that I'm retired and I write for a blog. And beyond that, I didn't name this guy. You know, if you really know the Black Dahlia case incredibly well, you may figure out who I'm talking about, but possibly not. But the larger question is this, because the book, Murders, Monsters, and Madness in mid-century Hollywood, it spins out, and it takes a long time. It takes a long time to get to it. It's almost as if man was writing another book and somebody came along and said, hey, you know what? This would sell a lot better if you could suggest a killer. Okay. And so he does that. He starts out by saying, I'm not going to, it's hubris to try to solve the case. Then he spins out this wild scenario of who could have done it. Somebody on the list. And then he says, well, never mind. Which I say, you know, you got to have the courage of your convictions. But anyway, the point is, and it's a larger point, is people need to stop treating the Black Dahlia case like a game of Clue. And Mr. Man's guy didn't do it. If he has everything he says he has that's in here, he would know that his guy didn't do it, that his guy was interviewed by the LAPD and investigated by the LAPD and did not do it. And so what I am doing is I am calling out, as I always do, fraud and fakery. It doesn't matter if it is this guy or Carl Balsiger in Sisters in Debt. If Eli Frankel read all of his source material, he would have Carl Balsiger's service record, and he would know that there's no way Carl Balsiger committed the first of 2 murders because he was in the service. He was stationed out of state. So it's duplicitous. It's fraud and fakery. Same thing with P.U. Eatwell. If she read all of her source material, she would know damn well that Leslie Dillon didn't do it. He was thoroughly investigated. He didn't do it. And most of all, Steve Hodel. If he read all of his source material, he would know his dad never killed anybody. But, you know, and that's the thing. People keep taking this list and writing these books because where is the truth in true crime? When you know when you have source material and you know damn well somebody didn't do it. And so my job is I see it as calling out fraud and fakery, which is what this book is going to be. And what is Sisters in Death is. It's fraud and fakery. And you need to call it out. And I really ticked off P.U. Eatwell. Where's when I said, no, it wasn't Leslie Dillon. She got upset with me. It's funny, the authors who get upset with me. John Gilmore was upset with me. Steve Hodel's upset with me. P. Wheatwell's upset with me. And now Mr. Mann is upset with me. Is there a pattern? Anyway. So it is fakery and fraud to put out a book when you know the guy didn't do it. So where is the bar in quote unquote true crime? If you can pump out a book, maybe get a New York Times bestseller, interviews, cover story on People magazine. Does truth matter in the true crime industrial complex? It's a good question. And I will leave it at that. I have ranted and raved long enough, but again, the list of suspects that I just destroyed, it's a copy. I have others. None of those people did it. Nobody on that list killed Elizabeth Short. Stop treating it like a game of Clue. Don't do that. Okay, done. First of all, I got a question last time, and I responded to what I thought the person asked rather than what the person asked. Okay, so I need to go back and amend that. And the question was, prior to Severed, what was the most popular Dahlia book? Jack Webb's The Badge, or some pulp magazine? Okay. Before Severed, which was the first book on the Black Dahlia case, not quote unquote nonfiction, maybe. People deferred to The Badge. People deferred to The Badge because Jack Webb was the guy behind Dragnet, and he presumably had an in with the cops. But there's a lot of mistakes in The Badge, and more important, and this is really at the essence of The Badge. If you don't know what The Badge is, The Badge was written, I think, about 1958. Very influential on James Ellroy, because after his mom was murdered, his dad gave him a copy of The Badge. Great thinking, Dad. That was smart. And so, but The Badge is really the first book, the first treatment, I should say, to look at Elizabeth Short as this downbeat loser and drifter who, because she'd been busted for underage drinking, that saved her from an unmarked grave. That's Jack Webb. But pretty much everybody has followed in that path that he forged. Before then, the newspaper articles were generally sympathetic. The big article in True Detective for October of 1948, I think that was pretty sympathetic. The thing about that was that True Detective article tried to hook up the murder of Elizabeth Short with all these other killings that are unrelated, and it sort of clouded the water that way. But I would say Jack Webb, simply because he was it. Okay, so let's go over to the first question from the chat. Do we know if he was an actual person? Was that Sergeant Chuck? We're not sure. Nobody knows for sure. They spend an incredible amount of time looking for Sergeant Chuck. They don't know. But let me point out that the population of Camp Cook at the time Elizabeth Short was there. And the idea is that Elizabeth Short and Carl Balsiger knew each other from Camp Cook and hooked up in 1946 when she was back in Los Angeles. Okay. The population of Camp Cook when Elizabeth Short was there was 36,000 people. It's larger than Beverly Hills. It is ludicrous to carry on like everybody knew everybody else. No. There is nothing to support that. And according to what Balsiger told investigators, he met her right before she went down. If you recall the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short's outline of her life at all, you will remember that she went down to San Diego in early December. And so I believe he encountered her right before she went down to San Diego. But like everything else, Elizabeth Short had encounters with literally hundreds of random people. Okay? Hundreds of random people. Carl Balsiger was just another guy, just one of her many, many, many random encounters. He tried to be helpful to her. And so his name got dragged into it at the end, because, as I said, they encountered each other right before she went down to San Diego. But that was it. Okay. So let's see. Did Elizabeth Short's path ever cross with Marilyn Monroe? No, people would like to think that. It makes, it makes great symmetry to say, oh yeah, Elizabeth Short and Marilyn Monroe, either they knew each other or they had a lesbian affair. I mean, there's the whole Marilyn Monroe tangent. No. Okay. And while I'm at it, I got a couple of comments over, besides Mr. William J. Mann's comment on his book that he was upset. A couple of people said, hey, someone asked about Betty Bersinger. Is she still alive? And I said, I don't know. And somebody emailed in and said, yep, she's dead. And it's like, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I don't stay in touch with the people that I interviewed. I interviewed Betty Bersinger and her husband, John, in 1996. We had a great conversation. I had a great time with them. But that was not an interaction that was going to lead to a sustained relationship. most interviews are like that, where you don't have you go in, you interview somebody and everything's fine. And after that, they go on their way. Her husband, John, when I interviewed them, he had just had, I think, part of a lung removed. He was a heavy smoker. And so I think he predeceased her by a good bit. But, she was great. She was a fun interview. She was very charming. But it was very clear that the Black Dahlia was not a subject that she wanted to continue to discuss. She told me the story, and it's like, that was kind of it. She was emphatic that she didn't want to be found. Don't tell anybody how to find me. And so it's like, she really lowered the curtain on that, which is fine. I got what I needed. And somebody said, oh, well, the Aztec Theater was converted into a clothing store. Yeah, it was. And then I think the clothing store folded. My impression, the last time I checked on it, which was a while ago, was the store was vacant. The building was vacant. I don't know. Anyway, the only thing that's relevant to me is that it was a theater in 1946 when Elizabeth Short was there. Beyond that, I don't care. You can't carry all this stuff around, or you'll never get anywhere. Okay. Let's see. Where are we here? Who's in the photo booth picture with Elizabeth Short? Those pictures were taken in Indianapolis. Okay. What am I talking about? There's a couple of pictures of Elizabeth Short and a guy. And later on in the news reports, there was a couple who ran a rooming house, and they said, oh yeah, that's her and that's him. And I'm sure they checked in and all this stuff. And it's like, no. They ultimately found the guy. He lived in Indianapolis. The photographs, by the way, were from her trunk, which she shipped from Indianapolis to Los Angeles and never got again. So the pictures were taken in Los Angeles. They identified the guy. They interviewed the guy. And he really, again, you have to understand just how many random encounters Elizabeth Short had. He was just one of many, many, many encounters that she had. So yeah, they identified him, and he really couldn't tell him anything more about it. Let's see. It seems like all the crackpot theories include the two men and the blonde woman that she was scared of. I think that's down in San Diego. And one of Elizabeth's sympathy stories was that she was afraid of people. Whether she was or not, I don't know. And you have to understand, let me back up. The big challenge in writing about Elizabeth Short is, William Mann starts out with this great goal. He's going to peel away the myths and tell the story of who Elizabeth Short really was. Oh, that sounds great if you don't know anything. But the whole Black Dahlia mystique, and I'm going to post a review in a couple of days and antagonize Mr. William Mann even further. The whole, what I call the Black Dahlia mystique, is like a set of those Russian nesting dolls. Okay. You've seen those where you open it up and there's a smaller one. Okay. The big ones are what's been written about Elizabeth Short. You take those away and you get smaller and smaller and smaller ones until you get down to the stories that she told about herself, because Elizabeth Short was the first person to fictionalize her life. You got to remember that. She had a whole repertoire of sympathy stories, and she told them to everybody. She would say she was a grieving widow of a war hero. They had a son that died. She would tell that story. She would say that she was engaged to a guy who was in the hospital, and she was hoping that he would get out in time for their wedding. She told that story a lot. She would say that, I'm trying to remember all the other stories that she told. She had a whole bunch of them. She would say that, her main shtick was that she was out in Los Angeles she was from this fine Boston family. No, but she would carry on like she was from this fine Boston family, and she couldn't believe how they do things here in Los Angeles, how they do things out here. And she would be temporarily pressed for cash. And she had a lot of stories like that, but they were all stories. And as I point out again and again, Elizabeth Short didn't go on hundreds of dates. Okay. She went on one date hundreds of times. That's the difference. It was all her date would always be very carefully scripted. She knew exactly what to say and what to do. And she generally picked men who were predictable, presentable, and safe, except for one. So you have to understand who you're dealing with. And so, yeah, she would say that she was afraid of people. She was afraid of this or that. But, it could be just more of her stories. All righty. One of the submitted questions here. I'm wondering if you can give us a sense from your close readings of the coverage of the early days of the case in the Los Angeles papers, what the flow of the police investigation seemed to be in the early days. Was there a period when the LAPD seemed to be thinking the case could be solved? Did they make statements that they were looking at doctors? Did they comment on the flood of mailings that came in? And when did it all start fading? And did the police ever acknowledge that the case was turning cold? Okay. That's a big question. I could talk for hours about that, but I will not. Okay. A big murder like the Black Dahlia case has a very common arc in the news media, especially of that era. There's a very common arc. The newspapers want the case wrapped up quickly, and they get impatient, and they will pick up and move on to the next one. And what happened in the Elizabeth Short case was that they find her body, they identify her, they find out about her, and there's the mom and all the suspects and the confessors, and the police are doing this, that, and the other thing. And then after the inquest, her address book is mailed in, and that's going to break the case wide open. But the newspapers, generally, the arc of that is that they want it solved quickly. And if it isn't solved quickly, if the police are saying, well, we're developing clues and this and that, it's very typical for the newspapers, at least in those days, to say that the police are stonewalled or back where they began or whatever. Not necessarily true, but and you have to remember that the relationship between the police and the press was very different in the 1940s than it is now. Extremely different. They would tell things to the police. But I have to say, the depiction in Eli Frankel's, I think it's either Eli Frankel or William Mann's book, where they depict Aggie Underwood at the crime scene just blowing past the reporters, blowing past the police. That didn't happen. No, that didn't happen. If you look at the crime scene photos, you will see that Aggie Underwood is far back. She's standing in the street, probably a good 10 or 12 feet from the body. And they are keeping the reporters and the photographers back. Where that comes from is Aggie Underwood's supposed memoir that was ghostwritten by somebody else, and he just made up a lot of stuff. You have to be very careful of that. Anyway, but the press treatment of the Black Dahlia case specifically was clues were breaking fast. The big thing was they were looking for Red Manley. They figured out pretty early on that she had left San Diego with the mysterious redheaded man. And so there was a lot in the paper about the mysterious redheaded guy. And he was finally identified through a lot of police work and the reporters. They found out who he was. They got the license plate of his car. They ran it through DMV. They identified him. The examiner sent Will Fowler out to get photographs of him, which they did. And he was identified by various people. And so he was that was the hot story. And they thought it was going to be him. No, it's not him. And so then they have to go back to square one. And of course, the papers are all like, well, the police are at a dead end and that kind of thing. So the press was very impatient for a solution. But you have to remember, and I can't stress this enough, what the police do, what the detectives do has to stand up in court. Okay. that has to stand up against a defense attorney, a good defense attorney. Okay, the papers don't have to worry about that. They can fix a mistake in the next edition and nobody cares. But the police have to make sure that whatever they do is going to stand up in court. And the smart homicide detectives, the minute they go to a crime scene, they are already playing out in their head, how would this work out in court? How would this play in court? That kind of thing. And that's what Harry Hansen would do from the moment. It's like, how is this going to play in court? So I think, the short answer is I think that the press got impatient. There was a while where they were saying, well, the police were saying that, Jack Donahoe particularly, where they were looking at maybe the killer was a woman. And then they abandoned that and went back to it was a guy. But within a month, Jean French was killed, and the Black Dahlia was wiped off the front page at that point. And it would be, well, so-and-so confessed, or we're looking at this guy. That doesn't mean the police quit doing it. It just means the newspapers got tired of it and moved on to the Jean French killing. Okay. Let's see. If Walter Bailey had been arrested, and let me just take a second and cross out that question so I don't do it again. If Walter Bailey had been arrested for the murder of Elizabeth Short, would he have been executed, committed for life to an institution for the criminally insane, or been sent? I have no way of knowing that. I have no way. That is such a hypothetical. I cannot imagine. If someone had been arrested and convicted of killing Elizabeth Short, probably the death penalty, probably the gas chamber, most likely. But as specific about Walter, there's no way to know that. There's absolutely no way to know that. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. I'm finally cutting up. Okay. A little trolling action going on, and I will. There are always trolls. Okay, let me go back to the submitted question here. This is an interesting question. Have you ever read The Other Girl by Theodora Keogh, supposedly the first novel based on the Black Dahlia murder? No, I have not. I have never heard of that. I did a little research. That book is very hard to find. If you can find it, it costs a ton in print. You can get an electronic copy from Apple Books for 99 cents. I don't have any Apple computer, so I can't read it. But no, I haven't. It was dug up by somebody. They asked James Elroy, had he ever read it? No, he'd never heard of it either. And I'm not going to get detoured too much into who Theodora Keogh was. No, I haven't read it. We'll say it's a very niche publication, a very niche book, and incredibly hard to find. If you can find a copy, there was one copy listed online for $400, which, I don't care that much about what it says. Okay. Did Walter Bailey still have his high status positions by the time of the murder, or had he stepped down at all after being in his leadership position? Okay. What is Miss Joy asking about? Walter Bailey was chief of staff at Los Angeles County Medical Center, or Los Angeles County Hospital. Okay. And it's hard to tell. I actually tracked down a copy of the history of that hospital and talked to the woman who wrote it. And you will see in the list of where Walter Bailey was chief of staff at the hospital, there's just a question mark of when his term ended. She didn't know. He taught at USC, but it's unclear when that relationship ended. We don't know. So Walter Bailey seems to have kind of faded away very gradually, as happens with somebody who has memory issues. If you've ever dealt with somebody who has memory issues, dementia, whatever you want to call it, it's a very slow fade. It's a very sad process. If you've ever known anybody who's gone through that, it isn't pretty. It really isn't pretty. It is not a pretty process. Okay. Somebody asked, was Alexandra Partika thoroughly investigated for any part in the Dahlia's murder? Well, no. She was not a suspect. Walter Bailey wasn't a suspect. Walter Bailey wasn't investigated, and Alexandra Partika was likewise not investigated. No. Okay. Was the envelope used to mail her belongings to the press accidentally destroyed when the police were doing tests on it? I don't know. That's a good question. What is Eugene talking about? Okay. After the inquest, an envelope of Elizabeth Short's belongings from her purse, definitely from her purse, were mailed to the Los Angeles Examiner. And it was a little envelope. It's I forget the exact dimensions. It's a Monarch envelope. Okay. Stuff from her purse was mailed to the Los Angeles Examiner, addressed with newspaper cutout letters. And what they did when they received it, it was received by the post office. It broke open. And what happened was that because it was addressed to the Los Angeles newspapers, the post office, the postmaster general here and the postmaster here in Los Angeles decided, well, since it's addressed to the newspapers, our policy is that we have to inform them that there is this letter. And so they did. So the press got it because it was addressed to the newspapers, and the police also got there. And if you have undoubtedly seen photographs of these two guys dusting the envelope with fingerprint with powder and that kind of thing. And they found, according to Harry Hansen, in when he testified to the grand jury, they found smudges and blurs. I think they found maybe some partial prints because they took it somewhat apart in that there was, if you recall, here is Dahlia's, and Dahlia's is big. It's big type. And they thought maybe on the back of that they would find some fingerprints. What happened to the actual envelope? That's anybody's guess. I doubt that it was destroyed in testing, but where it is now, I don't know. It could have stayed at the LAPD crime lab. It could be in the file cabinet. I really don't know what happened to that subsequent to the analysis of it. I don't know. Let's see. And on the question of the, moving right along with the question of the envelope, do you believe any of the letters sent to the police and the press genuine? Yes. There's no question that the envelope with her stuff was from the killer. Okay. Somebody said, well, Finest Brown said, maybe it was a landlord or maybe somebody found it. And it's like, no. And here's why. We know positively that the material that was mailed in that envelope was from her purse. There's no question about it. There was her address book. There was her birth certificate. There was a social security card. There were business cards, little scraps of paper with phone numbers on them. All of it had been soaked in kerosene or gasoline or some kind of solvent. And the envelope was addressed with cutout letters. Now, if somebody had just found that stuff, what would you do? Stick it in an envelope. You wouldn't soak it with gasoline. Stick it in an envelope. After you typed the address, you see, there's no reason to cut out letters. If you could just type the address on the envelope and be done with it. If that's all it was, you could just mail it off. Whoever sent that didn't do that. Whoever did that had access to Elizabeth Short's purse. The only way to get that is to access to Elizabeth Short. And then, look, addressing an envelope with cutout letters takes a long time. That's not a simple process. Whoever did that spent a long time cutting out individual letters and pasting it all together. undoubtedly from the killer. The other letters, pranks, I think there were some people who meant well in there, but to the best of my knowledge, and also the police, the first one was for sure from the killer. There's no question about that. The others, a lot of pranksters, some people well-meaning, but a lot of goofballs. Some of the crackpot mail is in here, and there's just a lot of it. The police were getting, and the papers were getting, so much prank and crackpot mail that they actually sent 2 cops to one of the newspaper offices, I think it was the Examiner, every day just to look at the mail, just to see what they were getting. But it was all crackpots and cranks. Was Elizabeth Short tied up before death or after? Do we know? Probably before. Probably. But the question is whether she was conscious. And to get somewhat technical, what am I talking about? When you look at the photographs of the body, when you look at the autopsy pictures, you can see, and it's also in the autopsy, you can see that there are binding marks here. She's got binding marks here. There's a double ridge on each wrist and around her ankles. But Newbar, and again, remember that the autopsy report is incomplete. We don't have the complete autopsy anywhere, the report anywhere. But we can be fairly certain that if she were alive when she was tied up, there would be chafing. Okay? There would be chafing on those binding marks. And Newbar doesn't mention that. The only point he mentions that there is chafing is on her neck. He does mention that. So was she tied up before death? Yeah, probably. But was she conscious? That's the question. Okay. Let's see. Okay. I've got a lot more questions here, but let me go back to, did Elizabeth Short know people in Beverly Hills or ever live in Beverly Hills? Ann Todd said she did. I forget exactly now, but Ann Todd says she called somebody who had a Beverly Hills phone exchange, because in the old days, way before, shrouded in the midst of the past before the cell phone, there were phone exchanges. And they were a word and then followed by a number. And they were regionalized. So if somebody had a Beverly Hills number, you would know that. And Ann Toss said, well, when she called somebody in Beverly Hills, that impressed me. So yeah. How many Southern California cities did she live in? Hollywood. Elizabeth Short spent virtually all of her time in LA and Hollywood. She was very briefly in Long Beach, maybe a week or 10 days in downtown LA, and then it was strictly Hollywood the rest of the time. Okay. Wasn't what Hodel said. That's a George Hodel question. Sorry. Okay. Let's see. Another question here. Was Elizabeth Short fed her own excrement? Where does that come from? That comes from John Gilmore. John Gilmore made that up. Elizabeth Short being forced to eat her own feces. That is from Severed. Invented totally by John Gilmore. Totally not true. But certain people love that story. And because Severed is so early, everybody's kind of latched onto that. Again, it's not true. But and to William Mann's credit, he kind of equivocates on that particular detail, whether that's true or not. But Steve Hodel loves it. He loves that idea. And that's all I'll say about it. But no. Let's see. Again, that was made up by John Gilmore. Yeah, but remember, just submit it again. Let's see. Okay. We're coming up almost on the end. I've got one more question here that I can deal with quickly. And let's see. Were Elizabeth Short's genitals undeveloped, underdeveloped, or abnormal? Okay. That is a Will Fowler lie. I don't think I have the Will Fowler book here. I don't think. Do I? Do I have Will Fowler? Are you? Oh, yeah, here we are. Okay. Will Fowler, this guy. Okay. There he is right there at the crime scene. Will Fowler was the founder of the great tradition of lying about the Black Dahlia case. When I interviewed him, he went into this whole monologue about how Elizabeth Short had infantile genitalia. No, Will made that up. Totally made that up. Totally false. It got picked up in Severed. It's in here. Slightly different. And then from there, it went into, I believe it's in Cases That Haunt Us. But that is another one. It's totally fiction. Will Fowler made it up. There's nothing to it. He just made it up because he's Will Fowler. Will Fowler considered the Black Dahlia case his intellectual property. And he loved to make up stories about it to, in his words, fool a competition. And I will tell you now, I'm still ticked off at Will Fowler. I treated him like a friend. And all he did was lie to me. He lied to everybody, but he lied to me. And he had this whole recitation about Elizabeth Short. And, it's just not true. And so people love that detail. That one is a Will Fowler lie. The other one about Elizabeth Short eating feces, that's a John Gilmore story. There is a grand tradition. And this kind of brings me back around to where I started with the true crime community. There's a great grand tradition of lying about the Black Dahlia case. And the books get published and the facts just get mushed around. And it's exasperating. My only goal is to, as I said all along, my only goal is to set the record straight on the Black Dahlia case. That's it. I don't have an agenda. I don't grab anybody by the lapels and say, you have to believe the killer was Walter Bailey. I don't do that. If you do, fine. If not, fine. All you have to do is tell the truth and not put out another book of fakery and fraud that accuses a guy who is dead, can't defend himself, of a horrible crime when you know damn well, because it's in Boxy, damn well he didn't do it. It's that simple. Whether you're Steve Hodel or P.U. Eatwell or Eli Frankel or William J. Mann, they've all done it. And that is my objection to true crime. You don't have to be truthful. Okay, we are virtually done. This is a good stopping point. Again, remember the suspect list, tear it up. Tear it up. Those people are all investigated. The one thing you can be sure of is that nobody on that list killed Elizabeth Short. Just throw it out. Okay. And with that, we are done. Thanks, everybody. I will see you in, let's see. The George Hodel Ask Me Anything is the 16th. We'll see you then. Okay. Thank you. Say goodbye, Boxy. Bye.